I've been thinking a lot about Game of Thrones recently. Wondering if I should call her or start stalking her social media pages. But honestly, I'm stronger than that. Recently, I found out that her friend, who thought she could replace her, isn't doing too good. Now, I don't feel any better after finding that out. It isn't gonna change how she betrayed me. But I won't dwell on negativity and bitterness and angry nostalgia, because I'm not a Star Wars fan. Okay, now that we've had our fun, I'll be serious. I have been thinking about Game of Thrones. Now, personally, as a fan of the show who picked it up halfway through its run, and who has not and will not read any of the books, I didn't have any special attachment to the characters. I didn't cry when beloved characters died. I didn't feel fear or despair or even elation prompted outside of what the narrative itself gave to me. In fact, before I watched the show, I thought of it as just the Downton Abbey of Lord of the Rings. And no, I won't explain that. I thought that people had just picked up some boring show with slow-paced political intrigue, dog-shit boring battles with heavily armored knights clanking around slowly in mud fields, and extremely pale people having movie sex in cold, leaky castles. In reality, the show was anything but that from the very first episode. Deep characters, a well-built world, fantastically paced and scripted conversations and monologues, all delivered by a great cast. There was violence, misery, backstabbing, cutthroat depravity, and amorality, all of it enforced and hidden by the social rules, chivalry, and the veil of nobility. They managed to make the world feel bleak and cold without being grimdark and edgy. That came later. Game of Thrones was a show where the brutality of chance existed. There were only protagonists and antagonists. There were no main characters. A show where characters were punished for making the wrong decision, not the immoral one. Where you don't get what's coming to you just because. Mistakes had dire consequences. The setups and payoffs, the surprising deaths and betrayals were based on that. On the chaos and the frailty of our existence, and the unintended results of our actions. And it was all proven to us with one cruel sword stroke. In the background of the second half of the series, there was one particular character that transcended, elevating from protagonist or antagonist to main character. Even as the rest of the structure of the show changed from something fresh, shocking, and engrossing to a messy, expansive blockbuster held together by the reputation of the show, the ghost of George R.R. Martin's original vision, and probably flex tape. This character was piling up main character red flags. At every step and turn, during the second half of the show's run, the showrunners presented them to us as a chosen one, a savior, a godlike figure that people could not help but follow.
Gotcha, bitch!
You dummies thought it was going to be Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, the first of her name, the Queen of the... So what exactly am I getting at here? Is this a Jon Snow video? Why did I choose Jon over Dany? What's my leg day routine? I have answers for all those questions. But the first stop on this wild ride will be Hardhome. And to very quickly track Jon Snow to this point, I'll do a recap. Jon Snow is the son of Ned Stark. Now, since he's illegitimate because he's Ned Stark's bastard son, aka the son of Ned Stark, i.e., born of the seed of Ned Stark's infidelity, he chooses to join the Night's Watch to become a ranger like his Uncle Benjen. Jon takes his vows, becomes a bona fide crow, and saves the life of the Lord Commander of the Watch, Jorah Mormont, who gives him Excalibur Longclaw as thanks. Jon goes beyond the wall with the Lord Commander to recon increased wildling raids and activity when they learn of Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall. On a ranging mission, Jon fails to execute a captured wildling cutie, causing them to be separated from the rest of Jon's party. Jon is presented to Mance Rayder after a fellow captured crow enlists him to spy on Mance. Mance wants to get beyond the wall to flee the White Walkers and plans to attack Castle Black. Jon and his cutie patootie and her wildling buddies attack a village, and Mr. Goody Two-Shoes fails the kill your own dog test in the Spy 101 handbook and has to flee his lady love. She catches up to him and he tells her OG crows for life before she sprays up the whole block while he attempts to escape back to Castle Black. He makes it. After tying up some loose ends, the battle is on and starting to feel very much like Donkey Kong. Ultimately, the Night's Watch wins the day and Jon loses his lady love. After heading out to assassinate Mance Rayder under the guise of surrender, their confrontation is interrupted by Stannis the Manus Baratheon. Mance surrenders, Stannis wants to take the North back from comically evil guy, and he wants the wildlings to help. Mance says no, Stannis burns him, Jon Mercy kills him. Stannis wants Jon's help to retake the North and offers him a permanent name change from Snow to Stark. Jon says no and instead runs for president. Due to 3 million illegals voting, he becomes the new Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Jon requests reinforcements from the Northern Lords, executes a traitor, and plans to forge an alliance with Big Red and the Wildling Bunch. In exchange for a safe passage beyond the wall, as long as the Wildlings are willing to throw hands with the White Walkers. Big Red agrees as long as Jon accompanies him to Hardhome, a totally not consequential fishing village the Free Folk fell back to after their failure at the Wall to take Castle Black. Jon takes part of the negotiations to make peace when things go terribly wrong for Jon and the Wildlings. The White Walkers attack. Okay, that's the recap, and now we're ready to dive in completely. I remember watching a wordless, cryptic clip from completely uncontroversial YouTuber and scriptwriter Max Landis. Jon Snow is above the rim. We are witnesses. Now, it doesn't matter what Max intended to say by posting this, I'm just going to interpret it how I want to. Jon Snow cracks the facade. If the devil can bleed, it can be killed, and it's no more a coincidence that it's Jon Snow at the head of this particular spear than it is a coincidence that a harem protagonist keeps running into women that want him to get them pregnant after a 2-sentence conversation. Although while Jon downgrades the threat of the White Walkers from immovable object, they are within the same battle upgraded to unstoppable force. That ending scene is quite striking. Their strength is death itself. Why is this important? Well, in Game of Thrones, there are only 2 questions that need to be answered for the audience. Who sits on the Iron Throne at the end of the conflict, and what happens in the battle between humanity and the army of the dead? We, the audience, watch the political maneuverings of the cast, waiting as the characters wait, for the inevitable confrontation between a white Coachella hippie and a white Facebook wine mom. But there's a secondary battle only the audience knows about. In story, the only conflict that matters is the existential one, the battle between capital L life and capital D death. Or should I say, the battle between light and eternal darkness. Almost by default, Jon Snow is a character that sits outside the rest of the cast, uniquely positioned with the same knowledge as the audience. Winter is coming, and it rides a pale horse. There is no more important conflict, and that makes Jon the single most important character at this point in the story. Oh, damn. What a great climax. It seemed like more classic Game of Thrones. High-stakes decision-making, political infighting, loyalty versus loyalty, and answers that aren't universally right or wrong. The correct choice is the one that keeps you alive. The world doesn't bend to the whims of Westerosi morality, and especially not the morality of the Watcher. Once again, characters, fleshed out, living in a world we are observing, remind us that we, the audience, do not control their fate. Rules are rules, and Jon Snow's treason, Jon Snow's mistake, is punishable by death. Okay, I take it back. This is Jesus Christ, the Lord of Lights franchise player. He's 2013 LeBron James, or 2016, or 2018. Jon Snow's resurrection is special in this show, not only because it doesn't have a parallel in the books, but also because it marks a reinforcement of the fantastical elements of the show. There are prophecies, there are dragons, there are witches and gods, but death is death. Except for medieval Solid Snake, Jon Snow is the only character that resurrects, unless you count whatever happened with Arya here. This isn't just the hero's journey, and not in a Joseph Campbell sense, but in the destined sense. The show wants us to know that God exists. It has already shown us the devil, the antithesis of light, and now it's shown us our hero. We have our Arthur, and he has his Excalibur. He has been chosen by God and conquered death. I do remember feeling that the finale was such a return to form, and that Jon had earned his death through noble but naive actions, like his father before him. Did I want Jon to die? Of course not. Out of all the characters in Game of Thrones vying for power and prestige, Jon was one of the few that kept having leadership and tough choices pushed upon him and doing what he thought was right, regardless of personal consequence. Like his father before him. A moral bastion, clean, steely-eyed, and incorruptible, never seeking a station greater than himself, but simply serving as asked, tending his watch with honor. However, this Jon has been tempered by death and brought back some of the cold that lies beyond the grave, and it has shattered his naivety. In a shocking and sad turn, Jon Snow hangs his fellow brothers that turned upon him, including Olly. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. Leadership requires not just honor, but vision and the self-importance for your will to be done. You must become executor of law, you must be judge and executioner, or you become dead yourself. So Jon opts for something of a third choice. He becomes a leader with no commandment to follow him. Now let's move on to what is admittedly one of my favorite episodes of Game of Thrones.
The Battle of the Bastards or whatever. That was a classic Game of Thrones episode where Jon Snow deserved to die.
There was so much thrust going into this episode. Ramsay was eminently hateable, but more importantly, Jon had finally reunited with one of his long-separated family members, in what was genuinely a collective win for the entire audience. Sansa, who had suffered greatly at the hands of, two madmen, one of them brilliantly written and portrayed, and the other one, Ramsay, finally had made it to an unadulterated, pure, unfiltered ally in Jon Snow. There would be no ulterior motives, no double-dealing, backstabbing, quid pro quoing. Jon loved her, and would be happy to see her, and together they would do what was best. Now, what was best was taking the North back from terrible, really bad, twisted fucking psychopath, Ramsay Bolton. The icon of sin, and the most lame, grimdark Tumblr serial torturer ever. Ramsay Bolton is like Garth Ennis wrote Game of Thrones, and then it was adapted for the screen by Zack Snyder. No one hates Ramsay Bolton like they hated Joffrey or even Cersei. They hate seeing him on screen. He's a narrative eyesore. A person who is this evil and sadistic simply wouldn't be able to get anything done. His father, Roose, an appropriately savage person, would never have considered legitimizing him if he knew how unthinkingly cruel and savage Ramsay was. And he would definitely know. There's even a pretty good chance that Ramsay would have been assassinated by now. The writers wanted a supremely hated, Joffrey-like character, so they took only Joffrey's unpredictable cruelty, without the character behind it, and molded it onto Ramsay. And he does every bad thing a guy can do except children. He does violence both physical and sexual for his own pleasure. It serves no greater purpose. And the show was rightfully criticized for voyeurizing Sansa's abuse through Theon. Ramsay basically breaks the fourth wall with his savageness. He's one step away from standing on his opponent's chest in a wrestling ring and gesturing for the crowd to boo at him. He doesn't have a character. He's simply a personification of pure cruelty and evil for the good guys to defeat. Except now, Sansa no longer has to wait for Goku. He's here. Ramsay baits Jon with news that Rickon, a character we all care about deeply, is in his possession. Now all of the interested parties meet for a parley, where Jon suggests they throw hands 1v1, and Ramsay, an adult, who understands he has every advantage, says no. Davos, another adult, makes it clear that they shouldn't rush in like Ramsay clearly wants them to. It's face-off time. Ramsay, in another bit of psychological warfare, releases Rickon in the space between the front lines and begins shooting arrows at him, baiting Jon to break from his formation. But Jon, an adult, Jon totally abandons the plan. Rickon is killed anyway because, of course, he got killed. Jon bravely faces down a wall of Bolton soldiers alone in a gorgeous shot that is, in reality, one of the dumbest things ever. This is suicide. It's the medieval equivalent of facing down a bunch of cops standing behind their car doors in a movie, telling you to put the gun down, and then you turn around and point it at them. By the way, if he dies here immediately, it's over. All of his men, many of whom are friends, will be slaughtered, and Sansa, his sister, will have untold horrors visited upon her until she's most likely fed to Ramsay's dogs. This is a mistake as consequence of a character flaw that Jon Snow simply would not still have after everything he's been through. Everything on the battlefield must go their way. Mistakes must not be made, and all openings must be capitalized on. And even with all that, Littlefinger has to come through with reinforcements, or they're all dead. On Jon's end, he decides to stop being a leader and simply becomes someone in charge, doing what he wants to do with no regard for the men behind him. The uphill battle they were facing is even steeper, as the men whose lives he's risked must now move up to fight and protect him. After an insane, visually stunning battle that they lose, Deus Ex Littlefinger saves the day. The Vale smash and bash Bolton's men, forcing Ramsay to retreat to Winterfell, where once again Ramsay, facing imminent death and defeat, does a little more evil shit just for good measure. And Jon can have a moment he did not earn that still serves as catharsis for the audience, as he gets to work beating Ramsay to death before stopping himself. Because this is really Sansa's victory, and this is Sansa's moment. This is something I'm glad the show decided to give her, as she ties Ramsay up and feeds him to his hungry dogs, in a satisfyingly brutal and over-the-top death for a character that was over-the-top evil and villainous. After all that, Jon's eye hasn't strayed from the true threat. The White Walkers. After all is said and done, and the Lords of the North are done arguing, Jon Snow is named King of the North. Once again, while the final battle for the Iron Throne looms closer and closer, Jon Snow is focused on the existential threat. Now, this sets him apart from the other mystical figure in the story, Daenerys Targaryen. And I would even put a percentage value on that difference, like 25%. Jon convinces Dany that the real threat is marching south to wipe out all of humankind, and in turn tries to do the same with Cersei. Even then, as the parties of both conflicts come together, so does the final piece of Jon's plot armor fall into place.
And his name is Jon C.
Not only is he at the forefront of the conflict against the White Walkers, and a crucial piece in Daenerys' pocket, bro is a whole Targaryen himself, the rightful heir to the throne. No one throughout the entire show has more of a right or a stronger claim to the throne. This rightfully bothers Daenerys. Jon now checks off every mark for the audience and the characters in the show. He has both feats and pedigree to match the powerful position the writers have placed him in our minds. The show has set the table perfectly for the coming showdown. Titans colliding with titans, mythical figures representing concepts, a battle over not gold or land or petty disputes, but a battle for the fate of all mankind. And there's no better figure in this story to stand at the head of that battle than Jon Snow, or should I say, Aegon Targaryen, the last of the Conqueror's bloodline, ready to stand as both torch and torchbearer against the endless night. Whether or not he is Azor Ahai or the prince that was promised, or whether those two things are even the same, what is true is that he is the chosen one. This, more than anyone else, even Bran, is Jon's battle. This isn't a well-choreographed boxing film with defense and footwork, technique and superior tactics, where experience and conditioning win the day. No, this is Rocky. This is Lord of the Rings. This is razor-sharp spectacle and payoff. The story demands kings standing against kings, men facing down gods and demons, supernatural will and tenacity. It demands the duel to end all duels. It demands a showdown between light and darkness. It demands...
that's not where I thought this was going.
Well, the Night King is dead, and in a wholly unsatisfying manner. Also, with the Night King's death and the defeat of his army, Jon's story is over. For proof of that, think back to the last time you watched Game of Thrones Season 8, which was either never or back when it originally aired in 2019. He does nothing of significance for the rest of the entire run of the show. Nothing of significance. And then he f***s off beyond the wall to do whatever. So let's circle back after all this to answer some questions. Is this a Jon Snow video? Yes and no. Jon is simply the vehicle for the show living in two worlds. All of the other reasons Season 8 fails aside, after they ran out of book material to adapt, the nature of the show changed. Sure, with such a supernatural threat like the White Walkers, there's simply no way to avoid fantasy bullshit, but they welcomed it. The Red Wedding, the Clyde monologue, the Battle of the Blackwater, all that was replaced with Cersei tactical nuking a church, the Battle of the Bastards, and the Bells. These set pieces were not earned. With their budget ballooning, the show began to rest on the most epic and grand set pieces that could be seen outside of a movie theater. And they delivered. It's gorgeous. This includes Dany coming back to rescue Jon Snow and company from the dumbest Call of Duty mission I've ever seen. The story takes a backseat to spectacle and lets it drive as it gallops ahead. It's all savory barbecue and no leafy greens. They decide to feed our collective sweet tooth. The rousing campy speeches, the erasure of the gray morality the show rested on, and the replacement with good guys and bad guys, all of this was Game of Thrones transitioning into a more conventional, by-the-numbers fantasy story. So when it came time to subvert the expectations of the audience by having Arya kill the Night King without any direct confrontation from Jon, or even really Dany, it wasn't earned. The game had changed. It was anticlimactic because we had been trained to expect a climax, and a bombastic one. A brilliant spectacle, a clanging, war-crying, dragon-breathing song of ice and fire. Instead, our orgasm was collectively ruined. I didn't choose Daenerys because she's the 2017 Golden State Warriors of characters that rise from the bottom to become kings and queens. And no, I won't explain that. Actually, you know what? Yes, I will. Basically, Daenerys is an isekai protagonist. Also, I promised to tell you the answer to the last but not least question. What's my leg day routine? Well, I don't do legs.
On Friday, we do arms.
Merci and arrivederci, my fellow free folk. I'll see you later. Merci. Merci. Arrivederci. Arrivederci. Okay, now, hold on. Merci and arrivederci. Okay. Arrivederci. Arrivederci. Merci and arrivederci. Merci and arrivederci. Is that racist?